While the hack and slash genre is far from the most appealing to me, I found myself with a keen interest in the Devil May Cry series after getting some footage from 3 for one of the podcast videos I did earlier this year. And now that I've had a proper dive into the HD collection, I particularly wanted to share my thoughts on the original game, so that's what I'm gonna do. Let's rock, baby! Yeah, I'm never gonna do that again. Our protagonist, Dante, is the son of legendary hero Spada, looking to avenge his family through the demon Mundus. Trish here bursts into Dante's shop, sharing the name of the game, I wonder if No More Heroes intentionally copied that, and tells him that Mundus has been growing his powers on the mysterious Mallet Island, which the pair go to in order to take him down. Once they get to the island, Trish just kinda sods off, and the game ultimately winds up being pretty thin on story. Which is a shame, because these opening cutscenes are a lot of fun. They felt like an obscure cult movie Quentin Tarantino would have loved watching on a VHS in the late 80s, and honestly, I don't think I can articulate it any better than that. There is a bizarre tonal shift going into the gameplay for the first time, though. We go from seeing Dante shooting up a motorcycle after being impaled to roaming in what feels like something right out of a Resident Evil game. In other words, I was not the least bit surprised to discover Devil May Cry started life as Resi 4 before becoming its own thing. This doesn't quite balance the camp and creepiness as well as Capcom's later classic, but the atmosphere is still pretty effective. I especially like the organ parts and the exploration theme. It's weirdly upbeat and the sound has a distant quality to it, which makes it seem like it's actually being played by someone within the castle. That probably wasn't the intent, but to me it reinforces that you're not alone in there, and I just find it really nice and eerie. The Resident Evil connection also explains Dante's cocky attitude being similar to Leon S. Kennedy's, as well as the emphasis on exploration when compared to its follow-ups. It's satisfying to progress through this castle, unveiling new areas and returning to old ones with a different ambiance to before. There's a couple of traversal challenges which range from tolerable, an underwater section in first person that somehow isn't horrible, to why did no one playtest this bollocks? But the action is still very much at the heart of this experience, and it can be rather fun. There's a couple of pretty cool moves to pull off, and the combination of swords and guns feels surprisingly natural and satisfying to weave between. And activating the Devil's Trigger feature after landing enough hits feels super good to use. Now, part of the reason I'm not big on the hack and slash genre as a whole is they can feel a bit button mashy and somewhat mindless because of it. Devil May Cry feels like this in parts. Having the two different weapons certainly helps, but the enemies don't really require any different strategies to defeat. Okay, maybe you have to avoid certain attacks with some of them, but without a proper dodge button, it just feels really awkward to do, and even then, the game isn't particularly challenging save for a few parts. And the difficulty in those bits are more down to the camera than anything else. Oh boy, the camera is easily my biggest issue with this game. It's fixed and will change angles depending on your position in an area, which wouldn't be a problem if the angles weren't so drastically different from one another. It can make exploration a bit of a headache and not flow particularly well. And when it comes to the boss fights, the camera is usually in incredibly inconvenient positions where you can't properly gauge how close or far away your opponent is, which makes certain bosses a pain in the arse to deal with. And what's more disappointing is some of these bosses are pretty cool in concept, and using Devil Trigger against them is very good fun, but they do wind up feeling rather clunky in execution. Devil May Cry 1 is a game where the pieces are in place, and it does feel like you kind of had to be there when it came out to understand its impact on a more visceral level, because to me, it is very dated now. I can't say I fully enjoyed playing it, but it did hold my interest, which certainly counts for some. I can see the potential in there for a better game, and seeing as it's the first entry, I guess that's fair enough. And hey, before we wrap up, let's quickly go over my early thoughts on the other two games featured in this HD collection to see if they do become that better game. So 2, oh god, yeah, this one isn't it. 2 obviously has a less than flattering reputation, but I was curious to at least give it a try to see how it is. And yeah, the guns are OP and the camera is still a nuisance in fights, although much better when traversing, I'll give it that. But the real problem with it is it's just boring. The story premise being go do this and I'll tell you a bit more about your dad is pretty lame, and overall it's just meh. Luckily, what I've played of 3 so far has been very fun, and I'd say makes 1 feel like even more a product of its time where a lot of that potential has been fulfilled here. There's a bit more strategy involved in defeating the enemies and an actual dodge button, huzzah, and the campy tone is more consistent. It also looks to be a tough one too, or at least involve a certain level of endurance, so I'm looking forward to taking my time to face its challenges and hopefully I'll enjoy it very much.
Oh, look at that. I've been impaled.